Namaste. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. Hithche. This is a 1-hour walkthrough of Digha Nikâya, the long discourses, the long dialogues of the Buddha, volume numero uno. These translations are provided from the Polytext Society. Actually, it's not there. It is here, but these translations are actually provided from Rhys Davids. We're going to provide this part of it. This is volume 1. It says volume 2, but that's actually something else. That's what we're looking at right here. These translations are provided by Rhys Davids and in conjunction with Max Mueller. And there it is. So get into it. But before, blessing. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Allahu Akbar. Dao ke, dao fe, chang dao, min ke, min fe, chang min, ja Rastafari. Deus noster qui es in cele, sanctificator nomen tuum, vaheguru sanam. Baruch atah Elohim, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kasan bam sotav tzivanu l'sok b'dvrei Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison, seva mastu savejegatehe, sabe sata bovantu sukitata. Vagabia, aquaba upendo na amani, fakiri nesalami, chinta dan permen, le above me womanjaka. Ubuntu shabanda fakitka. Sheshe. Como Sunida, Domo Arigato, Pilama Yelo Wakantoko, Toko Doko Shingun, Gurmanagan. God, we thank you for always that you bless us. Ata Jam Yata Fanami, Mado, Aho, Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Amen. So, this is again volume 1, which includes the first 13 suttas of the Buddha from the Digha Nikâya, or the Digha Nikâya from the Buddha. Either way, works decently. Just to give a brief introduction about, so these are discussions that different people have with the Buddha during the time of the Buddha. These are adherents, like followers, students of the Buddha. These are critics, challengers of the Buddha. These are religious contemporaries who are seeking advice, challenges, and otherwise providing challenges to the Buddha. So these are this discourses, and it resembles the Gospels from Christian tradition in terms of the narratives. And in these discussions, the Buddha responds directly to the specific question or challenge that the other person is positing, and then oftentimes, particularly in volume 1, the Buddha eventually, usually, reverts or continues the guidance into the standard direction or standard guidance that the Buddha provides. And that's included particularly within the first sutta and then the third sutta, if I recall correctly. So it's like the standard teachings that the Buddha provides. This is verse 1, and the format of the suttas. The sutta is, again, another word for like a chapter or talk. The format, the general format for these suttas is pretty much the same from volume 1. It changes gradually with volume 2 and 3, dos and tres. There's a lot of repetition. A lot of these suttas have a lot of repetition, such that many of the translators don't translate all of it. It just says, just like before, ... So particularly with the translations from Rhys Davids, and this is over 100 years ago, still holds up as it's shared by the Polytext Society in the past few decades. There are actually there's a newer edition, but this is on the classic side. There are translations that are actually based from these translations that are provided from Buddhist practitioners that provide further articulation of the repetition. But anyways, less commentary on these joints, further text. My purpose for saying that is that in this walkthrough, particularly volume 1, the intention is to focus increasingly on the first sutta and the first few suttas that provide that basic teaching of the Buddha, and then from there on the subsequent suttas, focus further on the specific question being asked, and then when it gets to the point of the repetition, just saying like it says in the preceding suttas. So again, the first it's heavy laden in the beginning, at least in this first volume. Again, the topic and the format changes somewhat in the latter volumes. So there are 3 volumes, tres volumes, and 34 suttas altogether. So this is 1 through 13, 1 a 13, 1 through 13. With that being said, we begin. So one other thing is that these suttas, as the way they are presented, have a number of chapters. So some of the suttas only have 1 chapter. Some of the suttas have 3 chapters. So the first one has 3 chapters. I'm just going to do it sutta by sutta. So there it is. The first sutta is the Brahmajala Sutta. And the suttas are basically named after the people with whom the Buddha has the conversation. And most of the suttas begin with the same phrase, which is, "Thus have I heard." So this is the followers, the students of the Buddha who are actually narrating the majority of these suttas. I'm going to read the first verse from this first sutta of the Brahmajala Sutta to give a description of, or just to give the presentation of how the feel and the vibe is of the suttas, and then continue from here. So it begins, "Thus have I heard. The Blessed One was once going along the high road between Rajagaha and Nalanda with a great company of the bhikshus, with about 500 bhikshus. And Supaya, the mendicant, too, was going along the high road between Rajagaha and Nalanda with his disciple, the youth Brahmadatta. Now just then Supaya, the mendicant, was speaking in many ways in dishonor of the Buddha, the Dharma, in dishonor of the Dharma, and in dishonor of the Sangha. But young Brahmadatta, his pupil, gave utterance in many ways to honor the Buddha, to honor the Dharma, to honor the Sangha. Thus they two, teacher and pupil, holding opinions in direct contradiction to the other, were following step by step the Blessed One and the Sangha of bhikshus. Now the Blessed One put up at the royal rest house in the Ambalatika pleasurance to pass the night, and with him the company of the bhikshus. And also did Supaya the mendicant, and with him his young disciple Brahmadatta, and there at the rest house these two carried on the same discussion as before. So there's a lot of walking that the Buddha does from town to town, from place to place. That's the lifestyle of the sadhu, or of the bhikshu, the renunciant, within India. This is over 2,000 years ago. The Buddha follows a tradition, a path, a practice of walking from town to town, just like Jesus does in the Gospels, from place to place. The Buddha, the part of the culture within India is for the spiritual aspirant who leaves the household, who takes on the homeless life, to walk from place to place wherever people provide some contributions, some fill the beggar's bowl for such a spiritual aspirant to eat. So that's the lifestyle that the Buddha lives, going from place to place, sometimes staying in a place, particularly during the rainy season, staying in a place for an extended period of time. And there are many people who are doing this. There are many spiritual aspirants and many elders in that genre. And many of the elders and many of the particularly accomplished spiritual aspirants have followers who also lead that life and see that the person has gained some wisdom and want to learn from that person, and so follow that person. So it's a normal thing. It's not just the Buddha who's doing this. There are many others who are doing that as well. However, the Buddha is increasingly known for providing a teaching, the Dharma, that is increasingly effective and popular amongst the kinfolk. So This is one of the scenes. This is a typical scene of just going from one village to another. And there are deer parks. There are places that are established for such individuals to reside in, to have some respite, to have some rest, to have some safety and otherwise. So the kings, the governors of the different regions, the princes, and additionally of the different regions, even other priests who are living on the estates of princes, set up these places, deer parks, and additionally for spiritual aspirants to rest, to get some shelter from the elements, and additionally. So again, this is a typical scene for all the suttas, because that's the lifestyle that the Buddha lives. And it's actually an honor. It's actually a blessing for people to receive such an individual, such a spiritual aspirant. People vie for that and want the spiritual aspirants to arrive so they can learn. They can gain some advice, gain some peace of mind, and additionally. And so this is shared throughout the suttas as well. So this is a typical scene. Now, in this particular scenario, this particular narrative, the next day, the students of the Buddha are observing how the other spiritual aspirant and his teacher continue arguing about the Buddha, and they think to themselves, "Oh, this is fantastic! Look at how awesome the teachings of the Buddha are. They're even like separating a student from his teacher. They're unable to agree with each other." And so the Buddha gets understands what his own disciples, his own students are reveling about, and so he approach when the AM arrives and they're having breakfast. The Buddha asks them about what they've been talking about, and they tell him, and then he responds. And this is the very beginning of the Digha Nikâya, the beginning of the discourse. So we're getting an idea of like what the vibe is, and so here's how the Buddha responds to that, to the revelry, or to the somewhat a little bit of a prideness that the students are experiencing from observing the other student and the teacher. So this is what the Buddha says in response. Brethren, if outsiders should speak against me or against the Dharma or against the Sangha, you should not on that account either bear malice or suffer heartburning or feel ill will. If you on that account should be angry and hurt, that would stand in the way of your own self-conquest. If when others speak against us, you feel angry at that and displeased, would you then be able to judge how much that speech of theirs is well said or ill? That would not be so, sir. But when outsiders speak in dishonor of me or of the Dharma or of the Sangha, you should unravel what is false and point it out as wrong, saying, for this or that reason, this is not the fact. That is not such. That is not so. Such a thing is not found amongst us, is not in us. But also, brethren, if outsiders should speak in honor of me, in honor of the Dharma, in honor of the Sangha, you should not on that account be filled with pleasure or gladness, or be lifted up in heart. Were you to be so, that also would stand in the way of your own self-conquest. When outsiders speak in honor of me, or of the Dharma, or of the Sangha, you should acknowledge what is right to be the fact, saying, for this or that reason, this is the fact. That is so. Such a thing is found amongst us, is in us. It is in respect of only trifling things, of matters of little value, of mere virtue, that an unconverted man, when honoring the Tathagata, would speak. So, again, the Buddha is saying, be modest, be honest, be balanced. Don't get caught up in people's honor. Don't get caught up in people's dishonor. Just focus on what the facts are and provide people that information accordingly. So the Buddha says that some people might recognize some of the benefits that the Buddha provides, but again, it's comparatively the aesthetics. And then the Buddha begins to describe what people might honor about what the Buddha does. So this is actually the beginning of the foundational teachings of the Buddha. It begins with basically the Panchasilas. This is other than the exact sequence of the Panchasilas, but it's very much the crux of the Panchasilas. And so I'm going to read the sequence. So I was just reading from verse 5. And the verse is a little bit different based on the translation, but this is verse 5 in part 1, chapter 1, uno, verse 5. That was actually 5 a 7. And now we get into verse 8, ocho. Putting away the killing of living things, Gautama the recluse holds aloof from the destruction of life. He has laid the cudgel and the sword aside, and is ashamed of roughness and full of mercy. He dwells compassionate and kind to all creatures that have life. It is thus that the unconverted man, when speaking in honor of the Tathagata, might speak. Or he might say, putting away the taking of what has not been given, Gautama the recluse lives aloof from grasping what is not his own. He takes only what is given, and expecting that gifts will come, he passes his life in honesty and purity of heart. Or he might say, putting away unchastity, Gautama the recluse is chaste. He holds himself aloof, distantly off from the vulgar practice, from the sexual act. Or he might say, putting away lying words, Gautama the recluse holds himself aloof from falsehood. He speaks truth. From the truth he never swerves. Faithful and trustworthy, he breaks not his word to the world. And then it goes on to that was verse 9, the concluding part, and then it continues on and talking about like honest speech, that is gentle and kind, and additionally to complete that element of honesty and truthfulness. But then from there it goes into further details, and it gives a list of disciplines that the Buddha practices, that again are kind of like what he describes as like the lesser part of the discipline, or the lesser part of the Dharma. And it goes from such things as abstaining from accepting silver or gold, or accepting uncooked grain, raw meat, women and girls, bondmen or bondwomen, slaves, sheep or goats, fallow swine, elephants, cattle, horse. I mean, he all these things the Buddha doesn't do. So people might honor him for that. So that is the short paragraph on conduct. And then it continues on by going in further detail about further things that the Buddha doesn't do. And it just describes a very austere lifestyle. Staying away from nautch dances, singing of songs, instrumental music, shows at fairs, combats of elephants, horses, and buffalo, games on boards, having luxurious furniture, a lot of the trappings that a lot of the hierarchies and leadership within society have. The Buddha abstains from having, and so he may be honored for that. But it's a mere virtue. It's a lesser virtue. Further about powders and cosmetics, and then low conversations, like talks about kings and robbers and ministers of state, I mean, all the things that people might do in terms of sociality, and additionally the Buddha abstains from doing. Argumentation, debating, the Buddha doesn't do that. Then the Buddha describes things that other people in his lifestyle, the other spiritual ascetics do, that he doesn't do, and that includes doing errands for rulers and Brahmins, priests, giving out like dishonest communications to people who provide for the spiritual practitioners, making predictions, and things like that other spiritual practitioners might do. It goes on and on in further detail, very significant detail, and on and on and on and on. And that's one of the reasons why the repetition when translation, because it's tedious, but there's purposefulness within it as well. So then the Buddha talks about other things that the Buddha abstains from doing, in terms of interpreting the signs of the moon and the soleil and the stars, forecasting what the weather will be, whether there'll be rain, whether there'll be harvests, plentiful harvest, about predicting warfare, the outcomes of warfare, interceding in terms of marriage, and prescribing lucky times or fortunate times to have marriage, and additionally providing charms for healing, all these things that other spiritual practitioners might do, the Buddha abstains from doing. So the Buddha lives a very austere life, even by the terms of his contemporaries, the other spiritual aspirants, and that then by verse 27, there's the conclusion of the list, or at that point. It continues on later, but in that conclusion with verse 48, the Buddha says, "There are, brethren, other things profound, difficult to actualize, hard to understand, tranquilizing, sweet not to be grasped by mere logic, subtle, comprehensible only by the wise. These things the Tathagata, having himself realized them and seen them face to face, hath set forth, and it is of them that they who would rightly honor the Tathagata in accordance with the truth should speak. So the Buddha is saying that for those who practice in his Dharma, and it's not his Dharma, it's a Dharma that he finds that others before him practice, other Buddhas practice, and so these Buddhas are referred to as Tathagatas. That there are greater disciplines, there's greater virtue for people to rightly honor. So to describe what those further virtues are, the Buddha describes goes back to describing some of the ways of his contemporaries, and not just his contemporaries, but even people, practitioners before him. He describes different types of theologies about beliefs, what other understandings people have had. He describes it as, there are recluses and Brahmins, brethren. This is verse 29. There are recluses and Brahmins, brethren. There are recluses and Brahmins, brethren, who can reconstruct the ultimate beginnings of things, whose speculations are concerned with the ultimate past, and who on 18 grounds put forward various assertions regarding it. And then the Buddha goes on to describe what those 18 different grounds are. It pertains to the beginning of the universe, what the point of creation is, the different perspectives, the different conclusions concerning that. And after listing all those different things that the Buddha does not prescribe in, this is how the Buddha describes the Buddha's response to all those different beliefs, all those different theologies. Now of these brethren, the Tathagata knows that these speculations thus arrived at, thus insisted on, will have such and such a result, such and such an effect on the future condition of those who trust in them. That does he know, and he knows also other things things much beyond, much better than those speculations. And having that knowledge, he is not puffed up, and thus untarnished, he has in his own heart realized the way of escape from them, has understood as they truly are the rising up and passing away of sensations, their sweet taste, their danger, how they cannot be relied on, and not grasping after any of those things men are eager for, he, the Tathagata, is quite set free. These brethren are those other things, profound, difficult to realize, hard to understand, tranquilizing, sweet, not to be grasped by mere logic, subtle, comprehensible only by the wise, which the Tathagata, having himself realized and seen face to face, has set forth. And it is concerning these that they who would rightly honor the Tathagata in accordance with the truth should speak. So that concludes the first chapter of the sutta. So the sutta continues on. The Buddha continues on describing additional schools of thought, schools of belief and theology amongst contemporaries and customary thought and practice. And much of these are attributed to either people meditating and remembering past lives for different durations of previous eons, or by just logic, by meditating, just coming up with this logical conclusion concerning, again, the beginning of things, whether it's eternalist, non-eternalist, and otherwise. So the Buddha describes these different processes, the different conclusions that are derived from it, again, after describing each of these different schools of belief and thought and theology, the Buddha says again, now of these brethren, the Tathagata knows that these speculations thus arrived at, thus insisted on, will have such and such a result, such and such an effect on the future condition of those who trust in them. That does he know, and he knows also other things much better, much beyond, much better than those speculations. And having that knowledge, he is not puffed up, and thus untarnished, he has in his own heart realized the way of escape from them, has understood as they truly are the rising up and passing away of sensations, their sweet taste, their danger, how they cannot be relied on, and not grasping after any of those things that men are eager for, he, the Tathagata, is quite set free. So again, we have the repetition, and that's one of the methodologies of memorization, and that's actually something to be mindful of, because in these suttas and also in the Buddhist practice, there's a lot of repetition. There's a lot of analysis about phenomena, and it gets very detailed, and the mantras are rather involved, and it requires doing this all day, memorizing, practicing it day in, day out, and even once one has it memorized, to keep it memorized, to retain it, practice. So it precludes living the household life of doing chores and looking after children and working in the field or otherwise, because all the time is spent practicing these things. And then when people arrive to ask consultation, then the Buddha and the practitioners can provide it at will, because it's practiced and practiced and practiced. But it's extremely difficult to do both the household life and to remember all those, to practice all that repetition and practice those mantras. So this is evident even just here within the sutta. Also, a side note is that in the Digha Nikâya emerges from the Theravadan branch of Buddhism that actually doesn't emphasize scriptures. It emphasizes practice, just being in the forest and living the monastic life. So a little bit of an irony about how substantial the teachings are here, when even within the tradition, it emerges, the lineage that emerges, the lineage doesn't emphasize the written word. It emphasizes a teacher teaching meditation and the life in the forest. So continuing on, the Buddha describes people who avoid answering questions, equivocators, and the different methodologies that people avoid. Spiritual practitioners avoid a question that they don't know the answer to, but just don't admit it, but just answer and try to wiggle out of it, as the Buddha describes. That's verse chapter 2 of Sutta Uno. It's verse 23. There are, brethren, some recluses or Brahmas who wriggle like eels, and when a question is put to them on this or that, they resort to equivocation, to eel wriggling, and this in 4 ways. So the Buddha goes on to describe those 4 scenarios, and what the characteristic is of the practitioner, why they resort to that type of response. And again, the Buddha says in conclusion of these, now of these brethren, the Tathagata goes that the Tathagata knows that these speculations thus arrived at, thus insisted on, will have such and such a result. ... And there's mention of those other practitioners who reconstruct the ultimate beginnings of things, who arrange the future and provide speculations concerning the future. And again, the Tathagata reverts back to the same conclusion. And then we get into chapter 3. And then the Buddha describes the different theologies concerning existence, and the nature of the soul, and whether it has form, is formless, it has and has not form, neither has nor hasn't form, is finite, infinite, is both, is neither. So the Buddha again describes all these different speculations and all these different theologies, and then describes the different discussions, the argumentations about these different theologies. And it goes into further detail. It's an extensive list. And after, again, after giving this description, after giving this list of methodologies, Buddha describes the limitations of those methodologies, let alone the conclusions from those methodologies. The Buddha says in verse 71, Siddhanta Uno, they, all of them, receive those sensations through continual contact in the spheres of touch. To them, on account of the sensations arises craving. On account of the craving arises the fuel, that is, the necessary condition, the food, the basis of future lives. From the fuel results becoming, from the tendency to become arises rebirth, and from rebirth comes death and grief, lamentation, pain, sorrow, and despair. It is, brethren, when a brother understands as they truly are the origin and the end, the attraction, the danger, and the way of escape from the 6 realms of contact, that he gets to know what is above beyond them all. So actually that's a reference to the fourfold noble truth of pain, the origin of pain, which is desire, the transcendence beyond pain, nirvana, and then the eightfold path to attain the transcendence beyond pain and desire. So it's not explicitly stated here, but that's what the Buddha is referencing in verse 71 in preparation of concluding the entire sutta. And then the Buddha describes the nature of somebody who has that understanding. So that is, and that pretty much concludes that sutta. So that we go on to the next sutta, sutta numero 2, the Samanya Phala Sutta. So in this sutta, it begins again, thus have I heard. The blessed one was once dwelling at Rajagaha in the mango grove of Javaka, the children's physician, with a great sangha of bhikshus with the 1250 of the brethren. Now at the time the king of Magadha, Ajatasattu, the son of the Vidaha princess, on the Uposatha day, held on the 15th, on Komudi, white water lily, the full moon day of the 4th month, at night, when the moon was full, was seated on the upper terrace roof of his palace, surrounded by his ministers. And the king on that sacred day gave utterance to a hymn of joy. How pleasant, friends, is the moonlit night. How beautiful, friends, is the moonlit night. How lovely, friends, is the moonlit night. How soothing, friends, is the moonlit night. How grand a sign, friends, is the moonlit night. Who is the recluse or Brahmin whom we may call upon tonight, who, when we call upon him, shall be able to satisfy our hearts? So basically, the king is in on this holy day is feeling very inspired and looking for guidance, and so he asks his priests, the Brahmins, who they might know, who can provide some guidance to him, who can provide him some inspiration. His mind is ready to be inspired and get some and receive some wisdom. And so then, in response, many of his priests, it describes how a number of different priests give a suggestion to him about another Brahmin that he can consult with that evening to receive that type of guidance. And so they give further description of each of these different Brahmins. And after each recommendation, the king is just like, okay, what else? Who else? And he doesn't say why, but he just says who else. And after a while, the king notices one of his advisors being quiet, and he says, "So you over there, you're quiet. What do you suggest?" And so the quiet one says, "Hey, there's the Buddha. You might try him." And the king says, "Yeah, okay, let's try the Buddha." So they go to talk with the Buddha, and as they're arriving, he goes on his elephant. He's walking to the place, the deer park where the Buddha is lodging. And as they're approaching the assembly where the Buddha is, the king begins to get nervous. He's like, "Yo, it's too quiet." Like, he's a king. He's like, "Yo, when is this quiet? Yo, it's trouble. It's trouble." So the king said here in verse 10, "And the king, when close upon the mango grove, was seized with a sudden fear and consternation, and the hairs on his body stood erect. And anxious and excited, he said to Javika, who is his advisor, 'You are playing me no tricks, Javika. You are not deceiving me. You are not betraying me to my foes. How can it be that there should be no sound at all, not a sneeze nor a cough in so large an assembly of the brethren, amongst 1250 of the brethren? Fear not, O king. I play no trick, neither deceive you, nor would I betray you to the foe. Go on, O king. Go straight on. There in the pavilion hall the lamps are burning.' Then the king went on his elephant as distant as the path was passable for elephants, and then on foot to the door of the pavilion, and then said to Javika, 'But where, Javika, is the blessed one?' 'That is he, O king, sitting against the middle pillar, and facing the east, with the brethren around him.' So then the king approaches the Buddha, and he says to the Buddha, this is verse 12, 'Then the king went up and stood respectfully on one side, and as he stood there and looked on the assembly, seated in perfect silence, calm as a clear lake, he broke out, "Would that my son Udayi, Bada, might have such calm as this assembly of the brethren now has." And the Buddha responds by saying, "Do your thoughts then go where love guides them? I love the boy and wish that he, Udayabadi, might enjoy such calm as this assembly has." So then the king greets the Buddha and asks the Buddha a question. The Buddha says, "Ask whatever you want." And so the king says, "There are, sir," this is verse 14, 14, "There are, sir, a number of ordinary crafts, mahats," and he lists a number of I'll say the whole thing just to get an idea of like how involved the text is. So again, verse 14. There are, sir, a number of ordinary crafts: mahouts, horsemen, charioteers, archers, standard bearers, camp marshals, camp followers, high military officers of royal birth, military scouts, men brave as elephants, champions, heroes, warriors in buckskin, homeborn slaves, cooks, barbers, bath attendants, confectioners, garland makers, washermen, weavers, basket makers, potters, arithmeticians, accountants, and whatsoever others of like kind there may be, all these enjoy in this very world the visible fruits of their craft. They maintain themselves and their parents and children and friends in happiness and comfort. They keep up gifts, the object of which is gain on high, to recluses and Brahmins, gifts that lead to rebirth in heaven, that redound to happiness and have bliss as their result. Can you, sir, declare to me any such immediate fruit visible in this very world of the life of a recluse? So he's saying that all these people, all these different trades of craftspeople get some benefit. They get some money, they get some trade or whatever. That's tangible. They live off that. They give it to their family, their friends. So what does a recluse get? Like, what is the benefit of being a recluse? What can the Buddha give him some example of what's beneficial? So rather than immediately answering the question, the Buddha asks him, have you asked that to anybody else before? And the king says, yeah. And so the Buddha says, well, what was the response from the people that you had? So then that's when the king begins to recite all those other recommendations that his priest provided at the beginning. He describes his conversation with each of those other priests that were recommended before, and all the different unsatisfactory answers, to say the least, that the other priests gave. And there are some pretty some rather ridiculous responses. So the king was unconvinced by all these responses, which is why he was unconvinced by those recommendations from his priests. So that goes on, and that goes in length about all those previous conversations that the king has. So after giving all those responses, then he asks the question to the Buddha again. He says, okay, that's who I've asked before. Now, can you answer that? And so the Buddha says, I can, O king. This is verse 34. And to that extent, I would fain put a question to you. Answer it as you may think most fit. Now, what do you think, O king? Suppose amongst the people of your household there were a slave who does work for you, rises up in the matin before you do and retires later to rest, who is keen to carry out your pleasure, anxious to make himself agreeable in what he does and says, a man who watches your every look. Suppose he should think, strange is it and wonderful, this issue of meritorious deeds, this result of merit. Here is the king of Magadha, Ajatasattu, the son of the Videha princess. He is a man, and so am I. But the king lives in the full enjoyment and possession of the five pleasures of sense, a very angel, methinks. And here am I, a slave, working for him, rising before him and retiring later to rest, keen to carry out his pleasure, anxious to make myself agreeable in deed and word, watching his very looks. Would that I were like him, that I too might earn merit. Why should not I have my hair and beard shaved off, and don the yellow robes, and going forth from the household state renounce the world? And suppose after time he should do so, and having been admitted into a sangha, should dwell restrained in act and word and thought, content with mere food and shelter, delighting in solitude. And suppose your people should tell you of this, saying, if it please your majesty, do you know that such a one, formerly your slave, who worked for you, and so on, as said before, has now donned the yellow robes, and has been admitted into a sangha, and dwells restrained, content with mere food and shelter, delighting in solitude? Would you then say, let the man come back, let him become a slave again, and work for me? And the king responds, nay, master. Rather should we greet him with reverence, and rise up from our seat out of deference towards him, and press him to be seated. And we should have robes and a bowl and a lodging place, and medicine for the sick, all the requisites of a recluse made ready, and beg him to accept of them. And we should order that watch and ward and guard be to be kept for him according to the law. But what do you think, O king? That being so, is there or is there not some fruit visible in this world of the life of a recluse? Certainly, master, that is so. This then, O king, is the first kind of the fruit visible in this world, which I maintain to arise from the life of a recluse. So, okay, that makes sense. A slave leaves the life of the castle and goes to live a life of the spiritual ascension, and is respected for that. Is supported even by the king, who used to have him as a slave. So that's a fruit of the fruit of the life of a recluse. That seems rather evidenceable and logical. So then the king says, okay, so yeah, I can see that, but what else? Is there anything else? So then the Buddha provides some additional responses to the follow-up question. So he makes the example of a free man who lives on land, who pays taxes, and additionally and goes and does the same path. Um, and then the Buddha describes the arrival of an arahant, one who has won the truth, and describes how one is inspired from that, and lives that life of peacefulness and truth. Um, and then the Buddha describes how the behavior, the conduct of that man is benevolent. And then to describe how that conduct is benevolent, the Buddha then refers back to the same sequence of virtue, the silas, that is described in the first sutta. So now we have again the repetition. After that description, the Buddha talks about takes it further now. Instead of just the virtue, the minor details of mere morality, the Buddha then further describes self-restraint, restraining the senses. And in verse 63 of Sutta numero dos, the Buddha describes it as this. And then that bhikshu, O king, being thus master of the minor morality, sees no danger from any side. That is, so much as concerns his self-restraint in conduct. Just, O king, as a sovereign duly crowned, whose enemies have been beaten down, sees no danger from any side. That is, so much as enemies are concerned, so is the bhikshu confident, and endowed with this body of virtues, so worthy of honor, he experiences within himself a sense of ease without alloy. Thus is it, O king, that the bhikshu becomes righteous. And how, O king, is the bhikshu guarded as to the doors of his senses? When, O king, he sees an object with his eye, he is not entranced in the general appearance or the details of it. He sets himself to restrain that which might give occasion for evil states, covetousness, and dejection to flow in over him, so long as he dwells unrestrained as to his sense of sight. He keeps watch of his faculty of sight, and he attains to mastery over it. Same thing with hearing, sounds, touching, and all the different experiences of the senses. There's that discipline. And the Buddha just concludes with verse 65. Thus it is, O king, that the bhikshu becomes mindful and self-possessed. So mindful and self-possessed comes from restraining the senses. And from restraining of the senses, there is contentment. Contentment with simplicity of life, what is provided to support the life. And then the Buddha describes that with that contentment, with that support, with the simplicity of life, verse 67, then master of this so excellent body of virtuous precepts, gifted with this so excellent self-restraint as to the senses, endowed with this so excellent mindfulness and self-possession, filled with this so excellent content, he chooses some lonely spot to rest at on his way, in the woods, at the foot of a tree, on a hillside, in a mountain glen, in a rocky cave, in a charnel place, or on a heap of straw in the open field. And returning thither after his round for alms, he seats himself, when his meal is done, cross-legged, keeping his body erect and his intelligence alert. Intent. So there's a sequence. There's an intentional sequence that's communicated here. That from the virtues comes in the simplicity of life comes this peacefulness and this discipline, and then the meditation. So then with the meditation, there is this sequence of putting away the hindrances, the 5 hindrances, and this is one of the prominent teachings of the Buddha. The 5 hindrances. So it proceeds again, verse 68, 68. Putting away the hankering after the world, he remains with a heart that hankers not and purifies his mind of lusts. Putting away the corruption of the wish to injure, he remains with a heart free from ill temper and purifies his mind of malevolence. Putting away torpor of heart and mind, keeping his ideas alight, mindful and self-possessed, he purifies his mind of weakness and of sloth. Putting away flurry and worry, he remains free from fretfulness, and with heart serene within, he purifies himself of irritability and vexation of spirit. Putting away wavering, he remains as one passed beyond perplexity and no longer in suspense as to what is benevolent. He purifies his mind of doubt. So again, those are the 5 hindrances, and that's a significant practice within the teachings of the Buddha. So then the Buddha gives a metaphor. It's actually a parable. Okay, yeah. So it's beneficial to go to articulate this, because again, this is foundational within the teachings of the Buddha. So this begins with verse 69. 69. Then just, O king, as when a man after contracting a loan should set a business on foot, and his business should succeed, and he should not only be able to pay off the old debt he had incurred, but there should be a surplus over to maintain a wife. Then would he recognize, I used to have to carry on my business by getting into debt, but it has gone so well with me that I have paid off what I owed and have a surplus over to maintain a wife. And he would be of benevolent cheer at that, would be glad at heart at that. Just, O king, as if a man were a prey to disease and pain and very ill, and his food would not digest, and there were no strength left in him, and after a time he were to recover from that disease, and his food should digest, and his strength come back to him. Then when he recognized his former and his present state, he would be of benevolent cheer at that, he would be glad of heart at that. Then just, O king, as if a man were bound in a prison house, and after a time he should be set free from his bonds, safe and sound, and without any confiscation of his treasures. When he realized his former and his present state, he would be of benevolent cheer at that, he would be glad at heart at that. Then just, O king, as if a man were a slave, not his own master, subject to another, unable to go whither he would, and after a time he should be emancipated from that slavery, become his own master, not subject to others, a free man, free to go whither he would. Then on recognizing his former and his present state, he would be of benevolent cheer at that, he would be glad of heart at that. Then just, O king, as if a man rich and prosperous were to find himself on a long road in a desert where no food was, but much danger, and after a time he were to find himself out of the desert, arrived safe on the borders of his village, in security and peace. Then on recognizing his former and his present state, he would be of benevolent cheer at that, he would be glad of heart at that. Just so, O king, that bhikshu, so long as these 5 hindrances are not put away within him, looks upon himself as in debt, diseased, in prison, in slavery, lost on a desert road. But when these 5 hindrances have been put away within him, he looks upon himself as free from debt, rid of disease, out of jail, a free man and secure. And gladness springs up within him on his realizing that, and joy arises to him thus gladdened, and so rejoicing all his frame becomes at ease, and being thus at ease, he is filled with a sense of peace, and in that peace his heart is stayed. So, those are 5 parables. Those are attached to the 5 hindrances. The Buddha doesn't say explicitly that each of the hindrances is that particular affliction and experience of the alleviation of that affliction, but it leaves room for discussion, because each one can be applied or applicable to any of those hindrances. So, from that was concluded at verse 75. And then the Buddha goes on to describe the continuing experience of spiritual awakening and spiritual ascension. And this is actually an extremely skillful parable. The Buddha describes 4 distinct parables, but the parables are sequential and build upon each other and describe the 4 jhanas. The 4 jhanas are the 4 happinesses, the 4 stages of happiness. And this is attained through, again, deep meditation. And the Buddha describes this process through the guise of these parables. And again, it's a continuing. The parables are distinct, standalone parables, but at the same time, there's an implicit, a subtle sequence building upon the parable. So I'm just going to read it and let it speak for itself. So Again, continuing with verse 75, 75. Then estranged from lust, aloof from evil dispositions, he enters into and remains in the first jhana, happiness or raptures, described here in English. A state of joy and ease born of detachment, reasoning and investigation going on the while. His very body does he so pervade, drench, permeate, and suffuse with the joy and ease born of detachment, that there is no spot in his whole frame not suffused therewith. Just, O king, as a skillful bathman or his apprentice will scatter perfumed soap powder in a metal basin, and then besprinkling it with water drop by drop, will so knead it together that the ball of lather, taking up the unctuous moisture, is drenched with it, pervaded by it, permeated by it, within and without, and there is no leakage possible. This, O king, is an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world, higher and sweeter than the last. Then further, O king, the bhikshu, suppressing all reasoning and investigation, enters into and abides in the second jhana, a state of joy and ease born of the serenity of concentration, when no reasoning or investigation goes on, a state of elevation of mind, of a tranquilization of the heart within. And his very body does he so pervade, drench, permeate, and suffuse with the joy and ease born of concentration, that there is no spot in his whole frame not suffused therewith. Just, O king, as if there were a deep pool with water welling up into it from a spring beneath, and with no inlet from the east or west, from the north or south, and the celestial should not from time to time send down showers of rain upon it, still the current of cool waters rising up from that spring would pervade, fill, permeate, and suffuse the pool with cool waters, and there would be no part or portion of the pool unsuffused therewith. This, O king, is an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world, and higher and sweeter than the last. Then further, O king, the bhikshu, holding aloof from joy, becomes equable, and mindful and self-possessed, he experiences in his body that ease which the arahats talk of when they say, the man serene and self-possessed is well at ease. And so he enters into and abides in the third jhana. And his very body does he so pervade, drench, permeate, and suffuse with that ease that has no joy with it, that there is no spot in his whole frame not suffused therewith. Just, O king, as when in a lotus tank the several lotus flowers, red or white or blue, born in the water, grown up in the water, not rising up above the surface of the water, drawing up nourishment from the depths of the water, are so pervaded, drenched, permeated, and suffused from their very tips down to their roots with the cool moisture thereof, that there is no spot in the whole plant, whether of the red lotus or of the white or of the blue, not suffused therewith. This, O king, is an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world, and higher and sweeter than the last. Then further, O king, the bhikshu, by the putting away alike of ease and of pain, by the passing away alike of any elation, by any dejection he had previously felt, enters into and abides in the fourth jhana, a state of pure self-possession and equanimity, without pain and without ease. And he sits there so suffusing even his body with that sense of purification, of translucence of heart, that there is no spot in his whole frame not suffused therewith. Just, O king, as if a man were sitting so wrapped from head to toe in a clean white robe, that there were no spot in his whole frame not in contact with the clean white robe. Just so, O king, does the bhikshu sit there so suffusing even his body with that sense of purification, of translucence of heart, that there is no spot in his whole frame not suffused therewith. This, O king, is an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, and higher and sweeter than the last. With his heart thus serene, made pure, translucent, cultured, devoid of evil, supple, ready to act, firm, and imperturbable, he applies and bends down his mind to that insight that comes from knowledge. He grasps the fact that this body of mine has form, it is built up of the four elements, it springs from far more, it is continually renewed by so much boiled rice and juicy foods. Its very nature is impermanence, it is subject to eration, abrasion, dissolution, and disintegration, and therein is this consciousness of mind too bound up, on that does it depend. So then, that after concluding the four jhanas, the Buddha goes on to describe the further ascension of the spiritual awakening, and there are further parables that the Buddha applies to each of these different stages, and it proceeds. Actually, there's a lengthy procession of further insights that the person receives on this deep meditation, including what's referred to as special powers, the heavenly eye, knowing other people's thoughts, remembering past lives, and additionally, and eventually, from the four jhanas, the four stages of happiness, into this insight, this enlightened insight, then there is the description of the Four Noble Truths, and this is explicit This is stated explicitly. We're in verse 97 at this point. With his heart thus serene, ... he directs and bends down his mind to the knowledge of the destruction of the deadly floods. He knows as it truly is, this is pain. He knows as it truly is, this is the origin of pain. He knows as it truly is, this is the cessation of pain. He knows as it truly is, this is the path that leads to the cessation of pain. He knows as they truly are, these are the deadly floods. He knows as it truly is, this is the origin of the deadly floods. He knows as it truly is, this is the cessation of the deadly floods. He knows as it truly is, this is the path that leads to the cessation of the deadly floods. So there's some repetition about the noble truth, the fourfold noble truth. And that is the summation of the Buddha's response and the Buddha's teaching. Again, there's the description of the virtue. Then there is the lifestyle, letting go of the hindrances, living this lifestyle, being content with simplicity, and then meditating, and from those meditations, experiencing the four jhanas, the four stages of happiness, and then beyond the four jhanas, there is the enlightened insight, and then from the enlightened insight, there is the awareness, the proper awareness of the fourfold noble truth. That also includes the eightfold path. And that is the foundational teachings that the Buddha shares throughout the suttas. That's the repetition. That's where the Buddha goes in most of his responses from each of the questions and challenges that he receives from the rest of in the rest of these discussions. And so the Buddha concludes in verse 98. This, O king, is an immediate fruit of the life of a recluse, visible in this world and higher and sweeter than the last. And there is no fruit of the life of a recluse visible in this world that is higher and sweeter than this. So, in response, the king says, fantastic, awesome, beautiful. I see. I was blind, now I see. And actually, the king is inspired to confess to the Buddha. The king actually confesses that the king actually killed his own father, who was a righteous king, because the present king was ambitious and wanted to be king, so he killed his own father. Didn't admit that to nobody before, but he admits that to the Buddha, and he apologizes to make amends, and he seeks forgiveness. And so the Buddha says that the king recognizes that it was wrong. He won't do it again. So we're able to recognize it, and probably the Buddha doesn't actually forgive directly, but just says that recognizes the process that the man goes through and encourages him to continue to behave in a further righteous way. And so then the king goes on because he's got a lot of things to do, and that's the conclusion of the discussion. The Buddha then comments to his own followers after the king leaves that the king was carrying a heavy weight, and because of him working that out, he has yet to attain the full insight to actually follow and proceed in this spiritual path. And so that concludes the second sutta. So those are the first two suttas. The third sutta is the Ambata Sutta. And again, from this point, the response that the Buddha provides eventually goes to what was just described in those first two suttas. So what I share here is basically the initial conversation that the Buddha has with the different people who approach. So we'll get into it. So the Ambata Sutta, number 3, numero 3, is described as a young Brahmin's rudeness and an old one's faith. So there's a Brahmin, a priest, who hears about the Buddha arriving, and he sends his own student, his own disciple, to go inquire of the Buddha. And the priest wants to know if the Buddha has been born. It has the 32 marks of a Superman, and this is a custom that is described within the traditional Buddhism about how to tell if somebody has the the qualities of an enlightened being. So there are 32 physical features. So the priest asks his disciple to go talk with Buddha and see if the Buddha has those 32 signs. So his pupil Ambata goes. Now, when Ambata arrives to talk with the Buddha, the Ambata is all types of disrespect. It says here, and the Blessed One opened the door, and Abhanta entered in. And the other young Brahmins also went in, and they exchanged with the Blessed One the greetings and compliments of politeness and courtesy, and took their seats. But Ambata, walking about, said something or other of a civil kind, and in an offhand way, fidgeting about the while, or standing up to the Blessed One sitting there. And the Blessed One said to him, "Is that the way, Ambata, that you would hold converse with aged teachers and teachers of your teachers, well stricken in years, as you now do, moving about the while, or standing with me thus seated?" And the Ambata replies, "Certainly not, Gotama. It is proper to speak with the Brahmin as one goes along only when the Brahmin himself is walking, and standing to a Brahmin who stands, and seated to a Brahmin who has taken his seat, or reclining to a Brahmin who reclines. But with shavelings, sham friars, menial black fellows, the offscouring of our kinsmen's heels, with them I would talk as I now do to you." What up? Basically, to be honest, he just called the Buddha a nigger. That's what he said, literally. And so the Buddha responds by saying, "But you must have been wanting something, Ambata, when you came here. Turn your thoughts rather to the object you had in view when you came. This young Brahmin Ambata is ill-bred, though he prides himself on his culture. What can this come from except from want of training?" What up? So now the Buddha says, "Yo, focus on what you came to me. What do you want from me? You came here for some type of reason. Why don't you focus on that?" And then he says further, this man is seems to be wanting of training because he's not concentrating. So he must not have been well brought up. So now that's an insult. Now Ambata is further angry. It says, "Then Ambata was displeased and angry with the Blessed One at being called rude, and at the thought the Blessed One was vexed with him. He said, scoffing, jeering, and sneering at the Blessed One, 'Rough is the Sakya breed of yours, Gautama, and rude. Touchy is the Sakya breed of yours, and violent. Menials, mere menials, they neither venerate nor value nor esteem nor give gifts to nor pay honor to Brahmins. That Gautama is neither fitting nor is it seemly.' Thus did the young Brahmin Ambata for the first time charge the Sakyas with being menial." So now Ambata is like insulting all of Buddha's family, which technically the Buddha should not take offense to, essentially, because the Buddha has renounced his lineage, essentially. But and actually a lot of the discussions are based upon the Buddha coming from a priestly caste. So some of the history about the Buddha is that he's a prince, he's a Kshatriya, second caste, which is high standing within Indian society, and he renounces his princely state. So he lives the life that anybody can do, lives the spiritual life. And so in that essence, he's not a Kshatriya anymore. However, many of the discussions that he has with his critics and students, they only quote to him because he has that standing, or they still recognize that he has that standing. So this is one case where the student is basically insulting the Buddha's blood family. And so then the Buddha asks, what did the Sakyas do to him? And so the student says that one time he went to Kapilavatu, which is the seat where the Buddha's family is based, and they were basically laughing at the Brahmin. And so he says that it's not fitting for Kshatriyas, the second class, to insult the first class, the Brahmin that the student is. And so then because of that, the student again says, calls the Sakyas mere menials, and insults his family again. And so then the Buddha asks about his own lineage, like where his people come from. And so then the student says he's a Kanhayana. And so then the Buddha says, okay, so the Buddha already knows his history, his family history, and describes how one of his ancestors was actually a slave, and that his not just a slave, but a black slave, and so the Buddha calls him a nigger. Literally, that's not hyperbole. Um, we're looking at verse 16. Yes, he says. Um, so he gives a story. He gives a narrative about the ancestor, and this is the conclusion of the story. Um, That is the reason about why they are known as Sakyas. Now, Okaka had a slave girl called Disa. She gave birth to a black baby, and no sooner was it born than the little black thing said, "Wash me more, bathe me more, set me free more of this dirt, so shall I be of utilization to you." Now, just as now Ambata people call devils devils, so did they call devils black fellows, Kanhei. And they said, this fellow spoke as soon as he was born. 'Tis a black thing, Kanha, that is born. A devil has been born. And that is the origin of Ambata of the Kanhayanas. So there it is right there. The Buddha called him back. So then the people, the other contemporaries of the student basically said to the Buddha, "Yo, that's insulting. Don't tell him that." And so the Blessed One says, um, with verse 18, quite so. If you thought otherwise, then it would be for you to carry on our discussion further. But as you think so, let Ambata speak for himself. So the Buddha's like, yo, if you think he can handle his business, let him handle his business, and be quiet and let him handle his business. So then they be quiet, and then the Blessed One asks him again, "Am I right? Am I right about your history?" And so eventually the actually the student stays quiet, and so the Buddha asks him again, "Yo, do you hear me talking to you? Am I right about your family?" And the student is quiet. He's not responding. He's all types of quiet at that point. And so the Buddha says, "If I ask you a third time, be careful, because thunder strikes." And so at that point, the student kind of wakes up and says, "Oh, what did you say? What was that?" And so after a while, the student says, "Yeah, I know, that is my history. That is my family history." And so when the own student acknowledges that, then all the other contemporaries say, "Oh, whoa, we didn't think that he'd be the student was ill-bred and this, that, and the other." And so then the Buddha says, "Oh, okay, they're devaluing too much." So then the Buddha the Buddha cleans it up somewhat by further describing the accomplishments of the same ancestor who is called the black fellow, devil, all them things, nigger. That's exactly what it is. So then the Buddha describes what that actual ancestor does, and how strong he is, how spiritually awakened, and additionally. And so then the Buddha talks about the differences between Kshatriyas and Brahmins. And the Buddha actually describes the Kshatriyas as being higher than the Brahmins because of the practices of the Kshatriya. And how if somebody is a Kshatriya being kicked out, they would still be accepted by the Brahmins, but if a Brahmin was accepted or kicked out by the Brahmins, then they would not be accepted. So in conclusion, the Buddha says, basically conferring something that is said before him, "The Kshatriya is the best of those amongst this folk who put their trust in lineage, but he who is perfect in wisdom and righteousness, he is the best amongst angels and men." So that concludes the first chapter of this third sutta. And it's interesting, well, without a lot of the commentary, just that's the conclusion of it. So the Buddha basically says that Kshatriyas are higher than Brahmins, but even higher than Kshatriyas is anyone who lives the life of wisdom and righteousness. Chapter 2 begins by the student Ambata asking, "But what, Gautama, is the righteousness and what the wisdom spoken of in that verse?" And so this is a very important doctrine that the Buddha describes concerning marriage, because in Buddhism, marriage is not affirmed or consecrated. People are able to marry, but Buddhist monks generally are not officiating marriages, because the Buddha teaches specifically asceticism and celibacy, the life of a monk, a monastic lifestyle. So here the Buddha describes part of the nature of marriage. And part of the challenge in being married. The Buddha says, again, continuing in verse 1, "In the supreme perfection in wisdom and righteousness, Ambata, there is no reference to the question either of birth or of lineage or of the pride which says you are held as worthy as I, or you are not held as worthy as I. It is where the talk is of marrying or of giving in marriage that reference is made to such things as that. For whosoever Mbata are in bondage to notions of birth or of lineage, or to the pride of social position or of connection by marriage, they are distant from the best wisdom and righteousness. It is only by having got rid of all such bondage that one can realize for himself that supreme perfection in wisdom and in conduct. So again, the Buddha is saying marriage is an option, but the higher righteousness is beyond the trappings, the discriminations that exist within that process of marriage and further. And then there's reference to the same teachings that the Buddha provides in the first sutta about virtue and additionally. The Buddha talks about four leakages. This is chapter 3. This is chapter 2. And the Buddha talks about heightened austerities and asks whether Ambata lives by these heightened austerities when talking about wisdom and righteousness. And Ambata admits not living those austerities. Then the Buddha describes his teacher, the student's teacher, and asks whether the teacher abides by these austerities, and again, not. And then the Buddha asks about the ancient teachers, whether the ancient teachers lived by these austerities. And the student says no. So then the Buddha says that, well, if all these people who are part of your lineage and authorities of you abstain from abiding by these austerities, how can one expect to experience and know that highest wisdom and righteousness? So that from there, then the student is so then the student is quiet, and the Buddha just recognizes that, but at the same time the student has yet to fulfill his mission of finding out whether the Buddha has the 32 marks. So the Buddha knows that, so then the Buddha is quiet and allows the student to quietly examine the Buddha to see if he has the 32 marks. He has the 32 marks. So then the student goes off and tells his teacher, goes back to his teacher. So then the student tells the teacher everything. The teacher upbraids his student, like, why would you insult the Buddha like that? What else could you expect to happen when you did that? Da 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 da. So now the teacher has to go to talk with the Brahmin. Now the teacher has to go to talk with the Buddha, and so the teacher asks the Buddha whether he had the talk with the student, and Buddha says yes, and so the Buddha, so the teacher brings also food for the Buddha in this process. And then basically the teacher apologizes for the student, and the Buddha says, it's all good. So then it basically just generally describes the Buddha's conversation with the priest. And from that conversation, then the priest also sees the wisdom and righteousness that the Buddha is describing. And specifically, it says that, and just as the clean cloth from which all stain has been washed away will readily take the dye, just even so did Pokarasari the Brahmin obtain, even while sitting there, the pure and spotless eye for the truth, for the Dhamma, and he knew whatsoever has a beginning, and that is inherent also the necessity of dissolution. So that's one of the prominent tenets of the Buddha's teachings, which is impermanence. So from there, the Brahmin priest again honors the Buddha and celebrates the teachings, and that concludes the Ambata Sutta. Going on to the fourth sutta, Sonadanda. Again, thus have I heard. So in this one, Sonadanda is a Brahmin. He sees he's going up on his terrace for siesta. In the middle of the day, he sees people walking over to see the Buddha. So he learns that the Buddha is there, and so and learning about the Buddha being there, he wants to go and talk with the Buddha. And so as he's getting ready to talk with the Buddha, his contemporaries, the other Brahmins, hear about him preparing to go see the Buddha, and they say, "Yo, you can't go talk to the Buddha. He's like, if you go to him, then you're saying that you're less than him because you're going to pay homage or you're going to honor him. So that's improper. Like, you're a high-ranking Brahmin, and we're like there. So if you devalue your prestige and your standing by going to visit the Buddha, that also devalues our standing. So you can't go to him like that. Let him talk to you." And so they give a description of the different qualities that the Brahmin has. There are specific traits that are attributed. And it says here in verse 5 that he was well born on both sides, of pure descent through the more and through the far, back through 7 generations, with no slur put upon him and no reproach in respect of birth. That he was prosperous, well-to-do, and rich. That he was a repeater of the sacred words, knowing the mystic verses by heart. One who had mastered the 3 Vedas, with the indices, the ritual, and the phonology, and the exegesis as a 4th, and the legends as a 5th, learned in words and in the grammar, versed in Lokayatra, nature lore, and in the theory of the signs and the theorem of the signs of the body of a great man. And that he was handsome, pleasant to look upon, inspiring trust, gifted with great beauty of complexion, fair in color, fine in presence, daily to behold. That he was virtuous, increased in virtue, gifted with great virtue that had waxed great. That he had a pleasant voice and pleasing delivery, and was gifted with polite address, distinct, not husky, suitable for making clear the matter in hand. That he was the teachers of many, instructing 300 Brahmins in the repetition of the mystic verses, and that many young Brahmins from various directions and various counties, all craving for the verses, came to learn from them by heart under him. That he was age-old and well-stricken in years, long-lived and full of days. That he was honored, held of weight, esteemed, worthy, venerated, and revered by Saniya Bimbisara, the king of Magadha, and that lists additional people who honored him. And says, for each of these reasons, it was not fitting that he, Sonadanda, the Brahmin, should call upon the Samana Gotama, but rather that the Samana Gotama should call upon him. So, after they gave all those reasons, then Sonadanda describes all the attributes of the Buddha, and says, for everything that they said about him, the Buddha has even further. And so then Sonadanda describes the list of the attributes of the Gotama, and after listing all those attributes, all the other priests say, you know what? Yeah, that sounds kind of nice. Let's all go see the Buddha. So as they're going to see the Buddha, Sonadanda becomes fearful. He starts to get insecure. He's like, oh, what if the Buddha asks me a question? I can't answer it. I'm going to look stupid in front of everybody, and then everything's going to go bad. And then Sonadanda thinks, but what if I ask a question to the Buddha, and then the Buddha says, yo, that's a stupid question? Then that's going to be bad. So then he's getting all nervous and insecure. He says, I wish the Buddha would just ask me a question about what I know, and I can answer it knowledgeably. So when he arrives to talk with the Buddha, that's what the Buddha does. The Buddha says, the Buddha knows the fear that the man is experiencing. Verse 11, now the blessed one became aware in his own mind of the hesitation in the mind of the Sonadanda, and he thought, this Sonadanda is afflicted in his heart. I had better question him on his own doctrine. And he said to him, what are the things, Brahmin, which the Brahmins say a man ought to have in order to be a Brahmin? So that he said, if he says, I am a Brahmin, he speaks accurately and does not become guilty of falsehood. So Sonadanda then rejoices that he's been asked a question that he knows how to answer. And he describes the 5 characteristics. In the first place, and this is verse 13, in the first place, sir, a Brahmin is well born on both sides, on the more side and on the far side, of pure descent back through 7 generations, with no soil put upon him and no reproach in respect of birth. Then he is a repeater of the sacred words, knowing the mystic verses by heart, and one who has mastered the 3 Vedas, with the indices, the ritual, the phonology, and the exegesis as a 4th, and legends as a 5th, learned in the phrases and in the grammar, versed in Lokayatra sophistry, and in the theorem of the signs on the body of a great man. Then he is handsome, pleasant to look upon, inspiring trust, gifted with great beauty of complexion, fair in color, fine in presence, daily to behold. Then he is virtuous, increased in virtue, gifted with virtue that has grown great. Then he is learned and wise, the first, or it may be the second amongst those who hold out the ladle. So after giving that list of 5 things, the Buddha says, okay, well, 5 qualities that a Brahmin is required to have to be considered a Brahmin? What if one of those qualities was taken away? Could he still be a Brahmin? And then the Sonadanda says, yes, Gautama, that can be done. We could leave out color. For what does color matter? If you have the other four, benevolent birth, technical training, virtue, and wisdom, as just set forth, Brahmins would still declare him to be a Brahmin, and he could rightly, without danger of falsehood, claim to be one. So then the Buddha pushes it. He says, okay, of those four things, could one be left out? And Sonadanda says, yes, O Gautama, we're looking at verse 15 here. Yes, O Gautama, that could be done. We could leave out the verses. For what do the verses matter? If you have the other three, benevolent birth, virtue, and wisdom, Brahmins would still declare him to be a Brahmin, and he could rightly, without danger of falsehood, claim to be one. The Buddha says, okay, now of those three, what if we leave out one? So then Sonadanda says, yes, Gautama, that could be done. We could leave out birth. For what does birth matter? If you have the other two, virtue and wisdom, Brahmins would still declare him to be a Brahmin, and he could rightly, without danger of falsehood, claim to be one. Now, when he says that, the other Brahmins say, yo, too much. They intercede. They're like, yo, nah, come on. You're discounting our birth now? Nah. I mean, we were quiet with the first two. You can't just take away our birth. And so, again, the Buddha says, if you think Sonadanda is incompetent to respond to my questions, then acknowledge that, and then you answer my questions. Otherwise, if you think he's competent to answer my questions, then you be quiet and let him answer the questions. So then Sonadanda speaks up for himself, and he says, "Yo, don't hate on me, kinfolk, my own Brahmins." And then he gives the example. He has his nephew in the crowd with them, and he says, "Look at my nephew. He's the finest of the color." Of complexion. Nobody here is as light as he is. But at the same time, if he goes around doing dirt, his light skin doesn't mean anything. So there's this insufficiency of that. And same thing in terms of learning the verses, the Vedas, and additionally, if he's still doing dirt and not and behaving wrong, the knowledge of the Vedas mean little. And then also the knowledge of his lineage. His nephew is purely born of back 7 generations because he's the uncle, so he knows the lineage. So even then, even though he has that lineage, it doesn't mean anything if he's not acting in a righteous way. And so with that, his contemporaries are somewhat quieted, and after saying that, after that's quiet, then the Buddha says, okay, so out of those two things, virtue and wisdom, could you leave one out and a person still be called a Brahmin? And at that point, Sonadanda says, no way, Jose. Have to have righteousness, have to have wisdom. Wisdom feeds righteousness, righteousness feeds wisdom. Both are required. And the Buddha says, I agree. I say the same thing too. And then then the Buddha asks, but what then is that uprightness and what that wisdom? Verse 22 right there. And then Sonadanda says, only Brahmins know, but I'd like to hear what the Buddha thinks. So then the Buddha says, okay, here it is. And then the Buddha goes into the spiel that's provided precedingly. And when he does so, then again, everybody rejoices and says, oh, that's awesome, that's fantastic. It's interesting, as the conclusion of this is that Sonadanda says that instead of bowing to the Buddha, as is typical of his students, then the Brahmin says, Sonadanda says, he gives like some interpreted gestures that if he raises his goad whilst he's on his chariot, or other these gestures for the Buddha to accept that as if he had gotten out of his chariot and made proper salutations to the Buddha. So that is the conclusion of the Sonadanda Sutta. And then we go on to number 5, the Kuddadanta Sutta. Now this one, again, is a Brahmin who wants to visit the Buddha. He's preparing an offering and wants to know like the details of making an offering. So again, similar to Sonadanda, he begins to go. The Brahmins criticize him for going, so he makes the argument on behalf of the Buddha, and his critic, all the Brahmins agree to go with him. So then the Kuddadanta arrives and asks the Buddha about a specific type of offering. And there are certain mechanics of it. Okay. So the Kudadanta asks in verse 9, and when he was so seated there, Kudadanta the Brahmin told the Blessed One what he had heard and requested him to tell him about success in performing an offering in its three modes and with its accessory articles of furniture of 16 kinds. So then the Buddha gives a response by giving the story of another Brahmin from previous days. Um, so in this narrative, there's a king who wants to provide an offering, and he asks his Brahmin advisor to tell him how to make the offering. The Brahmin advisor says that the king's kingdom is in disarray; it's in chaos. People are being criminal and everything else like that. And so, if the king were to make an offering in those conditions, it would be unfavorable. It would be inappropriate. So the advisor tells the king to get things in order, get his kingdom in righteous status in order for the offering to be proper. And the Brahmin goes further to describe how to make the kingdom righteous, because if the king just goes around killing everybody, that's not going to do it. So this is what the Brahmin advisor describes. Thereupon the Brahmin who was chaplain said, this is verse 11, said to the king's country sire is harassed and harried. There are dacoits abroad who pillage the villages and townships and who make the roads unsafe. Were the king so long as that is so to levy a fresh tax, verily his majesty would be acting wrongly. But perchance his majesty might think, I'll soon put a stop to these scoundrels' game by degradation and banishment and fines and bonds and death. But their license cannot be satisfactorily put a stop to so. The remnant left unpunished would still go on harassing the realm. Now there is one method to adopt to put a thorough end to this disorder. Whosoever there be in the king's realm who devote themselves to keeping cattle and the agriculture, to them let his majesty the king give food and seed corn. Whosoever there be in the king's realm who devote themselves to trade, to them let his majesty the king give capital. Whosoever there be in the king's realm who devote themselves to government service, to them let his majesty the king give wages and food. Then those men, following each his own business, will no longer harass the realm. The king's revenue will go up, the country will be quiet and at peace, and the populace, pleased with one with another, and happy, dancing their children in their arms, will dwell with open doors. So then the king does what the chaplain tells him to do, and that's what happens. Things get in peace. So then the king says, okay, now I want to make that offering. So then the chaplain advises his king to send out invitations to the different hierarchies, the different groups, castes within the kingdom, to get sanction, to get approval of the king making this offering. And so that's what the king does. And all the groups, the four different groups of society, agree to provide the offering. So that's one of the elements of the great offering. And then there's the description of the king being gifted in 8 ways. And again, well born on both sides, pleasant appearance, great wealth, powerful army, generous giver, learned and knowledgeable, and knowing the meaning of things that are said, intelligent. So those are the gifts of the king. The Brahmin has 4 gifts: well born on both sides, a repeater of the mystic verses, virtuous, and wise. So those are the 4 gifts of the Brahmin chaplain. So those all together constitute the 16 components of the offering, getting the sanction of the 4 groups, the 8 traits of the king, the 4 traits of the Brahmin chaplain, and then the 3 modes. This is what is described in terms of the modes of the offering that are advised. This is verse 15. Should His Majesty the King, before starting on the great offering, feel any such regret as great alas will be the portion of my wealth used up herein, let not the King harbor such regret. Should His Majesty the King, whilst he is offering the great offering, feel any such regret as great alas will be the portion of my wealth used up herein, let not the King harbor such regret. Should His Majesty the King, when the great offering has been offered, feel any such regret as great alas has been the portion of my wealth used up herein, let not the King harbor such regret. Thus did the chaplain, O Brahmin, before the offering had begun, explain to King Wide Realm the 3 modes. So there it is. Those are the elements of the offering. So then the Buddha also describes 10 other protocols particularly concerning the unseemly within society, those who do dirty things, who want to go to the offering, and additionally, and the Buddha describes a methodology for negotiating and dealing with such malevolence amidst the offering. And those are the elements of the offering. So then the Buddha describes when the offering is made, the people are inspired to work. The animals were not killed. The trees were not cut down. It was only the living off the fat, the butter and sugar of the society that is offered within the offering. So from that. That is the nature, that is the experience of the offering. And so everybody rejoices when hearing the offering. Oh, it's so awesome, it's so kind, it's so sublime. And except for the Brahmin who actually asks the question. And so people notice that he's not celebrating with them. And so they say, why aren't you celebrating with us? And the Brahmin says, well, the Buddha says that, thus have I heard. The Brahmin says that the Buddha does not say, thus have I heard, or thus does it benefit. He says, thus it was then. So the Brahmin recognizes that it was actually the Buddha that was involved in that offering. And so if that was the case of doing that in a previous life, then it must be that there's still the requirement of living another life, that must not be the optimal offering. So then the Brahmin asks the Buddha if that was actually the Buddha in a previous life who did that, and that the result of that offering still leads to a rebirth. And so the Buddha admits, yes, that is the case, that the Buddha was the Brahmin advisor in that respect. And so then the man asks, so the Brahmin asks, so what is a greater offering than this, or why isn't that sufficient? So then the Buddha says, well, even at such an event like that, people still behave in a ruckus kind of way. And so then the Brahmin asks, well, is there a greater offering than can be offered here? And then the Buddha provides a very beneficial formula. So it involves there are 5 stages that the Buddha describes, and then there are reference to the Panchasilas, the 5 ethics, and this is another foundational teaching of the Buddha. Beginning with verse 22, is there, O Gautama, any other offering less difficult and less troublesome, with greater fruit and greater advantage still than this? Yes, O Brahman, there is. And what, O Gautama, may that be? The perpetual gifts kept up in a family where they are given specifically to virtuous recluses. But what is the reason, O Gautama, and what is the cause why such perpetual givings specifically to virtuous recluses and kept up in a family are less difficult and troublesome, of greater fruit and greater advantage than that other offering with its 3 modes and its accessories of 16 kinds? To the latter sort of offering, O Brahman, neither will the arhats go, nor such as have entered on the arhat way. And why not? Because added beating with sticks takes place, and seizing by the throat, but they will go to the former, where such things are not, and therefore are such perpetual gifts above the other sort of offering. And is there, O Gautama, any other offering less difficult and less troublesome, of greater fruit and greater advantage than either of these? Yes, O Brahman, there is. And what, O Gautama, may that be? The putting up of a dwelling place, vihara, on behalf of the Sangha in all the 4 directions. And is there, O Gautama, any other offering less difficult and less troublesome, of greater fruit and greater advantage than each and all of these 3? Yes, O Brahman, there is. And what, O Gautama, may that be? He who with trusting heart takes on a Buddha as his guide, and the Dharma and the Sangha, that is an offering better than open largesse, better than perpetual alms, better than the gift of dwelling places, and the gift of a dwelling place. And is there, O Gautama, any other offering less difficult and less troublesome, of greater fruit and greater advantage than all of these 4? When a man with trusting heart takes upon himself the precepts, absence from destroying life, absence from taking what has not been given, absence from evil conduct and respect of lusts, absence from lying words, absence from strong intoxicating maddening drinks, the root of carelessness, that is an offering better than open largesse, better than perpetual alms, better than the gift of dwelling places, better than accepting guidance. So there we have a hierarchy of offering, from charity to tithing, perpetual alms, to um, charity, tithing, um, dwelling places, being a benefactor, to study, and then to taking a vow to practice the Panchasilas, those five disciplines, five ethics of peace, sharing, chastity, honesty, and sobriety. And then the Brahmin asks, well, in verse 27, 27, and is there Gotama any other offering less difficult, less troublesome, of greater fruit and of greater advantage than all these five? The Buddha says yes, and that's when the Buddha goes into the standard teaching. And again, there's responsiveness, and that's the conclusion of the Kuttadanta Sutta. Continuing on to the Mahali Sutta. Thus have I heard, verse 1. So a number of Brahmins go to visit the Buddha, and there's a certain interaction. Eventually, the Brahmins go to talk with the Buddha, and one of the Brahmins asks about heavenly sounds, and asks if those are actual and or real. The Buddha says they're actual, and the reason why a previous practitioner may have difficulty experiencing it is because the nature of the person's meditation was limited. So then the Brahmin asks further about the meditation and what the benefits are. And the Buddha provides further description concerning that. And basically goes into the standard teachings that the Buddha shares. And that's the Mahali Sutta. The next sutta, numero 7, the Jaliya Sutta, is actually described as being word for word the same as the Mahali Sutta. So we continue on to Sutta numero 8. Which is the Kassapa Sahanada Sutta. So again, it begins thus have I heard. And this practitioner is named Kassapa. He's a naked ascetic. And so he actually is further a little bit challenging towards the Buddha directly. And he asks if the Buddha disparages others who practice a style or a discipline of penance, of harsh renunciation. And again, in this culture, there are some who lead a kind of like an ordinary monastic lifestyle. There's some who are very extreme in doing extreme afflictions, self-afflictions, and feats of that amaze people in order to get support. And so the naked ascetic Kassapa asks if the Buddha just categorically disparages these other people who do those things. The Buddha says basically, I don't disparage other people. I don't hate on other people. I just value wisdom and righteousness. And so whether a person does all those other things doesn't necessarily mean that person is wise and righteous. So the Buddha describes other types of practitioners who do different things and are very intelligent and are able to do all these different types of reasoning and debates and argumentation, and basically devalue others. But at the same time, not practicing wisdom and righteousness. And so the Buddha just says, it's all about wisdom and righteousness. And then he describes, and in verse 13, and what kasaba is that way, what that method, which if a man follow, he will of himself know that and see that. Verily it is the noble eightfold path, that is to say, right views, right aspiration, right speech, right action, right mode of livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right rapture. So that's what the Buddha prescribes. Now, in response, the Kassapa, the naked ascetic, goes on to describe all the different afflictions and severities that other practitioners describe or practice. And so he gives a long list of all these different ways of doing it. And so then the Buddha responds by saying, well, if a person does all that and still doesn't practice righteousness, then all of that means nothing. And so the Buddha basically repeats each of those different examples that Kassapa shares. And so then Kassapa says in chapters verse 17, and when he had thus spoken, Kassapa the naked ascetic said to the Blessed One, hard is it, Gotama, to know when a man is a samana, hard to know when a man is a brahmana. The Buddha responds that Kassapa is a common saying in the world that it is hard to know a samana, hard to know a brahmana. But if being a samana, if being a brahmana depended merely on this asceticism, on the carrying out of any or each of those practices you have detailed, then it would not be fitting to say that a samana is hard to recognize, a brahmana is hard to recognize. So basically, just by looking at somebody, you may not be able to tell whether they are actually practicing righteousness. So if somebody's practicing these harsh practices, then yeah, you can tell that right away, but that doesn't mean anything. So in order to truly know if somebody's wise and righteous, it requires a little bit further investigation. So the Buddha then compares his path to the path of others, and basically says that there is none who is equal to the Buddha, and it's not. And the Buddha doesn't mean to be egotistical in that, but just matter of fact that amidst all the different schools and all the different methodologies, that the path of righteousness of the others does not exceed that of the Buddha. So then the Buddha provides a very nice articulation here. I'll finish with verse 21 and then share what the Buddha says afterwards. Basically, to give an example of what I just said, it says, the Buddha says, verse 21, there are some recluses and Brahmins, Kassapa, who lay emphasis on emancipation. They speak in various ways in honor of emancipation. But so much as regards the truly noblest, the highest emancipation, I'm aware of no one else who is equal to myself, much less superior. And it is I who have gone the furthest therein, that is, in the most complete emancipation of the path. So then he continues on to verse 22. Now it may well be, Kassapa, that the recluses of adverse schools may say, the Samana Gotama utters forth a lion's roar, but it is in solitude that he roars, not where men are assembled. Then should they be answered, say not so. The Samana Gotama utters his lion's roar, and that too in the assemblies where men congregate. And it may well be, Kassapa, that the recluses of adverse schools should thus in succession raise each of the following objections. But it is not in full confidence that he roars, but men put no questions to him. But even when questioned, he cannot answer. But even when he answers, he gives no satisfaction by his exposition of the problem put. But men do not hold his opinion worthy to be listened to. But even when men listen to his word, they experience no conviction therefrom. But even when convinced, men give no outward sign of their faith. But even when they give such outward sign, they arrive not at the truth. But even when they arrive at the truth, they cannot carry it out. Then in each of such case, Kassapa, they should be answered as before, until the answer runs, say not so, for the Samana Gotama both utters forth his lion's roar, and that too in assemblies where men congregate, and in full confidence in the justice of his claim. And men put their questions to him on that, and on being questioned, he expounds the problem put, and by his exposition thereof, satisfaction arises in their hearts, and they hold it worthy to listen to his word, and in listening to it, they experience conviction, and being convinced, they give outward signs thereof, and they penetrate even to the truth, and having grasped it, they are able also to carry the truth out. So, so then Kassapa is convinced. And he accepts the teachings of the Dhamma of the Buddha, and enters into the membership of the Sangha. And that concludes the Kassapa Sihanada Sutta. And on to the Sutta numero 9, the Potthapada Sutta. So Potthapada is a wandering mendicant as well. And he's a leader of a group of mendicants as well. They're sitting around talking about the things that the Buddha does not talk about. So when he sees the Buddha, he tells the assembly to be quiet so that the Buddha will arrive, because he knows that the Buddha appreciates quiet. So then the Buddha arrives. And then Potthapada asks him about the origin of ideas. And so then this is a further theological kind of conversation. And the Buddha responds by giving some of the description from the Samanya Phala Sutta, and then goes in to describe the 4 jhanas, and goes on to talk about the different theologies concerning infinity, the universe, again responding to the Potthapada specific question. It's very abstract, the discussion between himself and the Buddha, but it's the subject matter that the Buddha already addresses in the Samanya Phala Sutta and in preceding suttas. So there's further repetition here again. So after the Buddha provides his response concerning those specific topics, Potthapada agrees with him, and that's the conclusion of that immediate conversation. Then after that, the people who are participating in the conversation when the Buddha arrives, who are listening to the whole thing, are unconvinced by the Buddha. They say, like, the Buddha didn't answer your question. He didn't say like this, that, and the other, and because in actuality the Buddha says those things are insignificant. The important thing is further transcending all those ideas and conclusions. So then Potthapada agrees, but at the same time he recognizes that to his contemporaries, but he says that he still agrees with the Buddha. So then later, a few days later, they have another conversation, and Potthapada says that tells the Buddha, like, they were all hating, and the Buddha says, well, that's because they're not ready for the Dharma. They're not ready for that stage of enlightenment. And so the Buddha again says that, here quoting verse 33, some things, Potthapada, I have laid down as certain, other things I have declared uncertain. The latter are those 10 questions that you raised, and for the reasons given, I hold them matters of uncertainty. The former are the 4 truths that I expounded, and for the reasons I given, I hold them to be matters of certainty. So again, the Buddha just talks about the comparative futility, insignificance of these types of intellectualizations, and the priority of transcending beyond those considerations. Potthapada asks further questions about soul and spirit, and the Buddha says, are you still on this? Potthapada is earnestly trying to understand. So the Buddha responds directly to those additional questions, and provides some parables to further describe the temporality of what he's describing or what he's teaching. And there's another person who's with Potthapada called Kita, and there's a beneficial. Kita asks the following another question as well, and they're asking about past, they're asking about present, they're asking about future, which one is real, and additionally, and so at some point the Buddha describes here in verse 52, just Kita, as from a cow comes milk, and from the milk curds, and from the curds butter, and from the butter ghee, and from the ghee junket. But when it is milk, it is not called curds, or butter, or ghee, or junket. And when it is curds, it is not called by any of the other names, and so on. Just so, Kita, when any one of the three modes of personality is going on, it is not called by the name of the other. For these, Kita, are merely names, expressions, terms of speech, designations, and common utilization in the world. And of these, a Tathagata, one who has won the truth, makes utilization indeed, but is not led astray by them. So each one is actual, but at the same time, there is a relevance. There's a comparative relevance for each one at a particular context of experience and existence. So both Potapata and Kita appreciate the teachings of the Buddha and proceed accordingly. That basically concludes the Potapata Sutta. And going on to the Subha Sutta, Sutta numero 10. So it begins again, thus have I heard, and a Brahmin sends his student to talk with the Buddha. And so, in this particular situation, in chapter 1 at least, the student, Subha, so Subha, after a certain sequence of protocols, Subha, the Brahmin, goes to talk with the Buddha. The Buddha is actually just experiencing an illness and unable to talk, so Subha talks with Ananda, which is Ananda is like the one of the leading students of the Buddha, and Ananda becomes increasingly prominent in the latter volumes of the Digha Nikâya. So from that, the Subha asks basically the Ananda about what the Buddha teaches, and Ananda provides the basic teachings that are found in the preceding suttas. That is the conclusion of chapter 1, and chapter 2 begins with a continuation of those basic teachings, and that's pretty much the concept, the extent of that sutta. So we go into the Kevada Sutta, which is Sutta numero 11. So in this one, Kevada is a householder, and he solicits the Buddha to do a miracle, and the Buddha's like, I don't do miracles. That's not my thing. And so the Nalanda says, well, if you did a miracle, people would believe in you, and this place would get even further prosperous. And additionally, and the Buddha says, that's not the way of this Dharma, because it's superficial. Anybody can do these type of things and wow people. It doesn't last. It doesn't endure. And the Buddha goes on to describe what the actual teachings are, what the foundation is, what the trueness is. And so then the Buddha goes into the standard teachings, and after providing the standard teachings, the Buddha provides a description of a story, or provides a story, and in the story, there's an individual who asks about where the elements cease to exist: earth, water, fire, and air. And so the person goes into this path and into the heavens to ask the angels, and additionally about where the elements end. And there's an unsatisfactory response. So then eventually he's advised to talk to the Buddha. And the Buddha provides a response to that question about where do earth, water, fire, and wind cease. And the Buddha says, where do earth, he says, this is how the question should be asked, and this is how it is answered. Where do earth, water, fire, and wind, and long and short, and fine and coarse, pure and impure, no footing find? Where is it that both the name and form die out, leaving no trace behind? On that, the answer is the intellect of arahatship, the invisible, the endless, accessible from every side. There is it that earth, water, fire, and wind, and long and short, and fine and coarse, pure and impure, no footing find. There is it that both name and form die out, leaving no trace behind. When intellection ceases, they also cease. And that concludes the Kevada Sutta. So then we go on to the numero 12, which is the Lohika Sutta. So Lohika is a Brahmin, and Lohika was thinking about being stingy and sharing the wisdom that he has. And so he hears about the Buddha arriving, and he sends a servant to go ask for the Buddha to accept his offerings and have a meal with him and have a discourse. So the Buddha accepts. And when the Buddha is preparing to have the meal with the Lohika, the Brahmin, the servant is walking with him, and the servant tells the Buddha, confides within the Buddha, that Lohika is harboring this thought of being stingy with his wisdom and not sharing it with the other people in the province that he's authority within. So then the Buddha basically responds by asking Lohika directly about that, and Lohika basically says, "Yeah," and so because Lohika says, "What I share, people aren't going to do it. People aren't ready for. They're not going to like. It's not going to benefit nobody. So why go through it?" So then the Buddha says, "Well, you do your thing, but there's consequences." And so then the Buddha asks the Brahmin a question and says, and this is a very very skillful diplomatic way of posing a question to a person, of basically a reversal of roles, so the person can see the effect that the person is thinking about doing to somebody else. The Buddha says in verse 10, now what think you, Lohika? Are you not established at Salavatika? Yes, that is so, Gotama. Then suppose, Lohika, one were to speak thus. Lohika the Brahmin has a domain at Salavatika. Let him alone enjoy all the revenue and all the produce of Salavatika, allowing nothing to anybody else. Would the utterer of that speech be a danger maker as touching the men who live in dependence upon you or not? He would be a danger maker, Gotama. And making that danger, would he be a person who sympathized for their well-being or not? He would not be considering their well-being, Gotama. And not considering their well-being, would his heart stand fast in love towards them, or in enmity, Gotama? But when one's heart stands fast in enmity, is that unsound doctrine or sound? It is unsound doctrine, Gotama. Now if a man hold unsound doctrine, Lohika, I declare that one of two future births will be his lot, either purgatory or rebirth as an animal. So then the Buddha goes on further by describing the actions of King Pasenadi. So King Pasenadi is the actual Kshatriya, who is the king of the land, who is actually granting Lohika stay in that province. And so then the Buddha asks, well, what if King Pasenadi did that? Now it gets a little bit sensitive, because the implications of King Pasenadi withholding those riches and treasures actually does directly affect Lohika. So again, Lohika can see the effects of deprivation that has on others. So from there, the Buddha describes different types of teachers. There's a teacher who has not attained the objective that the teacher proclaims and teaches others, and others don't follow him. There's the same type of teacher who hasn't attained that objective and others follow him. Both are blameworthy. There's the teacher who attains that objective and actually is living and doing it, but at the same time his students don't follow and don't practice it as well. And so that teacher is also blameworthy. And so then there's the teacher that does attain the objective, and actually the students follow what the teacher shares. So then the Buddha goes into the standard teachings that the Buddha shares, and then Lohika says thank you. He describes himself as on the precipice of purgatory, but that the Buddha helps him to stay on the path of righteousness. And then we get to the 13th sutta, the Tavija Sutta. So there are two Brahmins, Vaseta and Bharadvaja, and they're having an argument. They say, let's go talk to the Buddha, and he can give us some advice about this. So that's what they do. They go to talk with the Buddha, and so they both are arguing about which is the right path. And the Buddha says, well, this is the path. And there's asking about little bit of equivocations type stuff. And the Buddha talks about the deficiencies of some of the traditional teachings, and particularly the practitioners, that the practitioners are not actually practicing the discipline, and so without the practice, there's the objective is not attained. The Buddha describes it, compares it to a man building a ladder to a house that does not exist. There's the comparison of a man proclaiming love for a woman he does not even meet in life. And so that the Buddha compares those types of proclamations of objective when the discipline doesn't match with that. So the Buddha also describes other types of feats that are implausible based upon those type of proclamations. And then the Buddha gives some of his standard teachings, the hindrances, the discipline, and additionally, and describes that these characteristics, this discipline is increasingly attuned with what the teachers, what the traditions apply or attribute to the Most High. And so it's only when one lives in that way that one approaches that oneness with the Most High. And so the Buddha eventually arrives at a sequence of teachings, and this is unique to the Digha Sutta up to this point compared to the other suttas. And this is actually a point of meditation. This is a mantra that is meditated traditionally within particularly Theravada Buddhism. In verse 76, he says, after the standard teachings, after the ascension of the virtues and the mindfulness and the 4 stages of happiness and the higher insight, there's this description. Again, verse 76. And he lets his mind pervade 1/4 of the world with thoughts of love, and so the second, and so the third, and so the fourth. And thus the whole wide world above, below, around, and everywhere does he continue to pervade with heart of love, distantly reaching, grown great, and beyond measure. Then the same thing is described. He lets his mind pervade 1/4 of the world with thoughts of pity, with thoughts of sympathy, with equanimity, and further. So from that, there is a celebration of the teachings of the Buddha, and that concludes the Digha Sutta. That concludes volume 1 of the Digha Nikâya. Alhamdulillah, Ar-Rahmani Ar-Rahim, Allah Wabha, Dao Ke, Dao Fe Chong, Dao Min Ke, Min Fe Chong, Min Ja Rastafari. Deus nos daqui, sincera sanctificado nome tuum, Vaheguru Sanam, Baruch Atah Elohim, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher quitzanu bo mitzvotav v'tzivanu l'sok b'divrei Torah. Amen. Kyrie eleison. Sevomastu savjagatehi, save sata bovantu sukitata. Vagabiyam. Aquaba, upendo namani, fikirne silami, chinta dampenamean, libov me umajaka. Umbudu shabana fikitka. Kamo Sunida, Domo Arigato, Pilama, Yellow Wakatoko, Tokodoko Shingun, Gormanigan. God, we thank you for all that you bless us. Ata Jamya Yatafanami. Bado, Aho, Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Amen. All thanks and praise to the Most High Elohim. Blessed love and peace. Respect and honor to all our ancestors, all our prophets, all our sages, past and present, known and unknown. Respect and honor to His Majesty Haile Selassie and Her Majesty Waizaro Manan. Blessed love and peace in Rastafari. One perfect love. Namaste. Assalamu alaikum. Shalom aleichem. Pax, paz, pay. Happy. Bedo.